Shipmates and Soulmates. Unable to sleep, Mary Aronson got out of bed in the middle of the night and walked out of her lonely house. She lived on the coast of England, and from the garden of her house she could see the Atlantic Ocean. She gazed out over the ocean and then looked up to find the brightest star in the sky. Night after night she talked to the star as if she were talking to her husband. "Edward, I don't like being on my own." Edward, Mary's husband, had died of lung cancer, and Mary couldn't remember how to live without him. She missed dancing in his arms on Saturday nights. She missed walking hand in hand with him through the English countryside. She missed picnicking by his side on the cliffs overlooking the sea. She was 63 years old and living alone for the first time in her life. She confided in her daughter Moya that she was terribly lonely. "Let's take a holiday," her daughter suggested. Half a world away in Charlotte, North Carolina, Merritt Burns also found it impossible to sleep. He knelt by his bed and prayed. He took sleeping pills. When the pills didn't work, he'd walk the streets of Charlotte for hours. During the day, he tried to shut the world out. He closed the curtains in his house, stopped the newspaper, cut off the cable TV. Often his son would visit and find him sitting in the dark. "How did your day go?" his son would ask. "I've been just sitting here," he would answer, hoping that nobody would call or come by. Merritt had lost his wife Lydia to cancer after 54 years of marriage. He was 76 years old and he wanted to die. "Let's take a vacation together," his son David pleaded. And so Merritt Burns and his son David flew to the western coast of Canada and boarded a cruise ship bound for Alaska. Mary Aronson and her daughter Moya flew from England and boarded the same ship. On the first night of the cruise, the four were seated together at the dinner table. Mary and Merritt hit it off immediately. They talked about North Carolina and England, about their families, about the 7-day cruise. They laughed a lot, something they both needed desperately to do. When Mary invited Merritt to go sightseeing with her when the ship docked in Alaska, Merritt immediately said yes. As Mary and Merritt walked through the streets of Juneau, Alaska, Mary took Merritt's hand. They walked hand in hand the rest of the day. That night, Merritt confided in his son, "Oh, I could have a lot of fun with her. She's brilliant." But Merritt had known Mary such a short time. Was he getting carried away? "Maybe this is just a silly infatuation." "At my age," Merritt said. "Enjoy it, Dad," David told him. Meanwhile, Mary was confiding in her daughter. "He makes my heart go flutter." To her daughter, Mary seemed like altogether a different person, no longer a lonely widow. She looked radiant, cheeks flushed, hazel eyes sparkling. "Do you think I'm making a fool of myself at my time of life?" Mary asked. "No, Mom, go for it," Moya told her. Mary and Moya talked mostly about Merritt, but they also talked about Merritt's son David. David and Moya were both single. David was divorced, and Moya had never married. Mary had noticed that David seemed to be flirting with Moya. "David's so nice," Mary said. "He's not the one for me," Moya answered. David was worrying so much about his father and still grieving for his mother that he kept his personality hidden. He was quiet and subdued. Whenever Merritt wasn't with Mary, David was by his side, a 48-year-old man following his father everywhere. Once David and Moya were together on the deck of the cruise ship. A little girl walked up to them and asked, "Are you married?" "Married," Moya said and laughed. "We're practically brother and sister." When the cruise ended, Mary and Moya flew back to England, and Merritt and David flew back to North Carolina. Every day, Merritt called Mary from North Carolina, where it was 5 p.m. to wish her good night. 3 months later, he flew to England to visit her. Walking hand in hand with Mary through the English countryside, Merritt knew he'd met his soulmate. Without warning, Merritt lifted Mary off her feet and sat her down on a rock. At 5 feet 11 inches, 180 pounds, he was still strong at 76. "You sit here," he said. "I'm going to sing you a love song." "Be my love, for no one else can end this yearning," Merritt sang. Mary looked around her. She could see people walking their way. "What will people think of me sitting up here on this rock with Merritt below belting out a love song?" she wondered. That night, over dinner at a pub, Merritt and Mary talked of marriage. "Look," he told her, "I'm old. I've got one foot in the grave. I can just see us getting married and my breaking down and you having to take care of me." "Well, if you'll take me just as I am," Mary said, "I'll take you just as you are. We'll grow old together." Mary and Merritt decided to get married in North Carolina. After Mary left England to prepare for the wedding, it was Moya's turn to feel lonely. Her father had died and her mother was 4,000 miles away across an ocean. Alone in the dark, she sat on the floor of her house and sobbed. Moya flew to the United States for her mother's wedding in the company of 2 of her aunts. There to meet them at the airport were David and Merritt. It felt good to Moya to have so much family around, to be held close by people who cared. As they walked to the car, Moya took David's hand. That simple gesture, which came so naturally to Moya that day, surprised David, yet he was excited about what it might mean. David seemed like a different person to Moya. No longer worried about his father, he was light-hearted and funny. He made her laugh so much tears rolled down her cheeks. The week she stayed in North Carolina for her mother's wedding, Moya spent by David's side. Now it was David and Moya who acted like teenagers falling in love. As Moya's mother walked down the church aisle to marry David's father, Moya nudged David and said, "Maybe we should knock them out of the way and say, 'Wait, it's our turn.'" David grinned. After her mother's wedding, Moya went back to England. But 3 months later, she returned to the United States to spend more time with David. She realized that he was the one for her after all. When David asked Moya to marry him, she said yes. David and Moya, like their parents, married in North Carolina. After their wedding, they drove to the cemetery where David's mother was buried. David placed Moya's wedding bouquet on his mother's grave. "Mom, this is Moya," David said quietly. David and Merritt have not forgotten Lydia Burns, wife and mother, who died in 1996. Nor have Moya and Mary forgotten Edward Aronson, husband and father, who died in 1995. Lydia and Edward are still thought about, still missed, still loved. The legacy of their lives is the love that bloomed between Merritt and Mary, David and Moya. It was almost as if, from wherever they were, they had planned it all.